next presentation is Hold the Line, Strategic Insights into Highline Defense in Professional Women's Soccer. Be presented by Ben Thorpe. Ben is a data science master's student at Yale University with a background in applied statistical modeling and machine learning. He will be presenting work completed with his teammate Adam Cohen from Duke University.
I'm Ben, presenting on behalf of both myself and Adam Cohen, and our project is Hold the Line, Strategic Insights into Highline Defense in Professional Women's Soccer. So here's a quick overview of what we did and kind of our motivation behind it. Start with the motivation piece. Famous defender Paolo Maldini once said, "If I have to make a tackle, then I've already made a mistake." And that really goes to show the power that tracking data can have in analyzing and quantifying defensive efficiency. And we chose to look at that in the lens of a high line. And so our first step was to quantitatively define a high line, both using Skill Corner's tracking data and associated metrics that they have along with that. Then we split the data into 3 in-possession categories to try and create a matchup we were analyzing, and those being counterattacks, quicker buildups, as well as more prolonged heavy possessions. Then we set our success metrics, which we mainly used cumulative expected threat as well as expected goals. And then we tried to use that framework to identify specific methods of analysis that coaches and managers that run teams potentially could use going forward within this framework. And then lastly, address our main conclusions and key takeaways from that analysis and go on to some potential future directions this kind of work could be applicable in. So first part of it is the high line itself. At first, we took a baseline approach of just doing some exploratory data analysis and getting a sense of the average tracking positions for each center back pairing over the course of different matches. So you can see in the plot there on the right here, I guess the axes are inverted just for the purpose of the image we put up here, but the X tracking position is positive for an attacking side. So like that version of 3 there. So that is the maximum we saw throughout the data set and also shown in that summary table on the left there. So for example, with Man City playing Bristol City, who finished bottom of the league in our data set, they were often high pushed up on the pitch, and so their center backs were actually in the opponent half more often than not in that game. And then also we want to shout out Skill Corner's last defender height variable, which also worked as a great proxy for us in being able to use that to set a threshold for what we considered a high line throughout our analysis here. So next, on the offensive side, we have in-possession types, which we decided to split into 3 basic categories. First, counterattacks, then quicker buildups, which kind of, in between the counters that were generally fewer than 5 actions and much quicker from a time frame perspective, and compared to the heavy possession, which, as you can see there, sort of those more prolonged periods that generally we saw from the better teams finished higher up in the table. And so we want to analyze, within each of these specific types of possession, which do best against high lines, and can we form any insights out of that? And for our success metrics, as I briefly said before, we actually looked at cumulative expected threat from Skill Corner, and to do that, we aggregated the data onto a possession level. So we made possessions from their dynamic events and accumulated the expected threat from successful passes in those, and so that was kind of our success metric on the possession level. And then we also looked at XG per possession using the Y-Scout event data provided to us, as well as the source possession ID, which was also useful for us. And here's just, some quick examples, and one thing I'll shout out here that we thought was very interesting was in terms of average expected threat, Bristol City actually showed up high when just looking at it overall. And this is a good segue into the next slide, because the reason for that is while they were far and away the worst team in the league during the season we looked at, because of that meant they counterattacked a lot. And just from an average perspective, counterattacks as shown in the histogram sort of at the top there, generally perform better, again, solely speaking, on average compared to the other types of possessions we looked at based on how we defined counterattacks. As a quick overview there, we were surprised that in over 20% of the possessions we looked at, that actually resulted in a shot against high lines. So just further giving credence to the fact that counterattacks generally seem the best way to attack these high lines in women's soccer. So now we're going to go into a few specific types of analysis we looked at that we thought we could use this framework to actually give insight out of. The first is looking at defensive structure. So these formations you're seeing here are actually the defense rather than the offense. And so, for example, looking at first plot, we found out of the 5 most commonly played defensive formations in the NWSL, a 4-3-3 worked best in terms of average expected threat allowed, followed by 4-4-2. And with a 4-2-4 there, with the opacity being darkest, that was the one that was actually utilized most often by teams in the league. And so in the Super League, we saw a 4-4-2 was not only used most often, but also most efficient on average. Next, which teams deployed Highline most effectively? We use color in a similar manner here. So, for example, the Portland Thorns, they utilized a Highline in the most number of possessions in our data set compared to others, but were middle of the pack in terms of that average opponent expected threat given up. And yeah, we looked at across both leagues there. Now we could even go down to the player level, so who produces expected threat most efficiently against high lines. So we took any players with more than 30 passes successfully made within the Skill Corner events data, and Sophie Smith came out on top in the NWSL with an incredibly high, when you're looking at an average perspective, value of greater than 0.04 for expected threat there on counters, so showing really how lethal she is on counterattacks against a high line this past season. Yeah, and now for just our main takeaways were that we could use this tracking data as well as the combination of that with advanced statistics to allow for more accurate measure of defensive performance specifically, and we couldn't have done this kind of analysis without the tracking data, and also the really unique sort of columns and variables that Skill Corner provides with that tracking data. On the defensive side, a 4-4-2 stood out to us as sort of the generic strongest choice for a high line, given both how often it's been utilized by managers, as well as the fact that it performed very well on those efficiency plots we looked at earlier. Counterattacks clearly have been the best way to attack high lines in general, and that was our main takeaway from the offensive perspective. For some future directions, for one, team strength effects are obviously in play here. That wasn't something we addressed in terms of this, but we really wanted to provide a framework that can be continued to potentially be worked on and just have that idea there. This is possible with the tracking data to analyze stuff like a high line. Additionally, we could go deeper rather than stopping at the possession level. You could look at specific patterns like, say, give and goes, or maybe line breaking passes, which was another unique part of the data we looked at, and see how those affect offensive play, especially within those different possession types we looked at. And then lastly, to compare and contrast with other defensive styles. So do we see the same things among things like mid blocks, low blocks, et cetera? Yeah, that's all I got. Thank you so much.